Hello everybody, so welcome to this new video. It's been a while, but I am officially moved, and that means I can get back to YouTube. And I've been working on a spreadsheet that analyzes dozens and dozens of stocks and screens for my favorite stocks out of the bunch, and I can rank them and look at them differently. But the point of these spreadsheet videos in general is to show you undervalued growth stocks. And undervalued growth stocks, hyper growth stocks, i.e. in my view, an hyper growth stock grows more than 30% their sales each year. That's what I'm going to cover in this type of video, in this type of spreadsheet video. But just as a reminder, I cover other things on the channel. One of the things I cover is long-term disruption. That's why I talk a lot about Tesla. I talk a lot about Enphase. These are more 10 years, 5 years out disruption, while this spreadsheet is specifically designed for next year, next 12 months, because I'm using the next 12 months growth numbers in this spreadsheet. And I also cover many stocks about debasement defense, what I call debasement defense in the form of hard assets, and that would be my Bitcoin videos. So this is kind of how you can reconcile the different type of videos on this channel. But this video specifically is about undervalued growth and undervalued stocks. And there's 5 rules in these videos which you may have intuitively seen in my prior videos. But here are those 5 rules as to why do I want to take on a business risk? Why do I want to go out and make money with a business that's going to hire employees and have a bunch of workers and a bunch of issues? There's many risks with securities. Why own a security that actually operates in business if it can't beat monetary debasement? And so that's why, to me, the only investable stock is an hyper-growth stock. That's the only type of stock that can beat the debasement. So my goal, of course, is to find a stock whose sales growth exceeds the growth in dollars, the growth in the total supply of dollar out there, the cause of inflation. And we know inflation doesn't stick on cheap TV dinners. Cheap industrial goods don't really see inflation as much as hard assets or hard goods. But if you're going to be a company, you're not necessarily a hard asset because you can issue more shares. But assuming you don't do that, you need to at least keep up with the rate of new dollar issuance. And we don't know how many dollars are out there. Like, our best estimate is M2 money stock, but that only looks at the US. M2 and M2 is 21 trillion. I happen to believe that we're well above 30 trillion in dollars, and we really don't know the speed at which it's growing. But if you read any good book on the topic, you know it's between 11 and 15%, and it's more likely 15%. So the sales must grow at least 15% each year just for the company to stay afloat. And that is how you gain some upside, in my view. Another important aspect of buying a cheap stock is asking the question, how much am I paying for that growth? How much am I paying for each percentage point of future growth? And this is where the enterprise value over gross profit over revenue growth ratio comes in. And that's, of course, that looks very much like the PEG ratio, if you're familiar with Peter Lynch's PEG ratio. But the main difference here, of course, is that we focus on gross profit and on revenue growth as opposed to earnings growth, because a lot of companies today in the hyper growth field, a lot of innovative companies, right? The only companies that can achieve that type of growth, the only companies that can grow 15%. A lot of these companies are optimized for gross profit. They are not optimized for earnings just yet, which is why, because they're not optimized for earnings, I'm not going to judge them on earnings. I'm going to judge them on EBITDA profitability. EBITDA, in my view, is the best proxy we can use for cash flow. And all I care about my EBITDA profitability when I look at the metrics, all I care about is that the firm doesn't go bankrupt. I don't want the firm to go bankrupt, and so I want that to be slightly positive, or if it's negative, like, I have a negative 2% or a negative 3%, something that gives you a long runway. That's my main concern, and that's why these spreadsheets include EBITDA profitability, because I don't want the firm to go bankrupt. Lastly, when you compare valuation, it's very important, in my view, to use enterprise value and not market cap. Why? Because if you look at, say, the market cap of a GM or a Ford, say in the auto sector, these stocks look cheap. But when you add all the debt that they've borrowed and that they gotta repay in the future or replace, when you add that debt, you realize it's not a cheap stock at all when you add the debt. And so many stocks out there in the S&P 500 have a tremendous amount of debt, and therefore they are not cheap companies, because in the capital structure, debt holders are higher up than shareholders. So debt is great. Debt is a way to get some leverage, and I understand that. But when I compare companies, I want to make sure that firms that have debt look more expensive and that they don't look falsely cheap, because in their capital structure, they decided to use debt instead of equity. And so that's why I use enterprise value and not market cap. And lastly, this is something I've added recently in my videos towards the first half of 2024, is the rule of 40. I am growing more and more confident that the rule of 40 is one of the best ways to assess a firm's potential outside of its valuation. And so I want the rule of 40 to be there, i.e. the stock needs to be rule of 40, i.e. EBITDA margin plus revenue growth. When you add both of it, it needs to exceed 40. And so that means that even if a stock has an EBITDA profitability of 0 or 1%, but it's growing 39 or 40%, it's still going to achieve a rule of 40 because of that growth. The growth is of the utmost important. And so these are the 5 criteria that rule this spreadsheet and that lead me in selecting stocks. And now let me go over the spreadsheet. So these are the 9 stocks that I've selected to today's spreadsheet. I find them holistically good on all of the metrics that I look at. First of all, revenue growth, sales growth. In my view, it's all good. Now, if you've been following for the channel for a while, I love 30%. 30% is kind of my preferred number. StoneCo next 12 months is predicted to grow at 15%. So that's the lowest. But StoneCo used to grow much faster, and I believe they will return to growth. But I still put it in there because 15% is still the cutoff for debasement, right? It's still matching the debasement. But then you got to look at that EBITDA margin, right? The EBITDA margin is similar to a MasterCard or a Visa, absolutely insane at 50%. That's why this stock does very well. Very rare to have an EBITDA margin this high. All of the other stocks are growing at more than 30%, with some of them showing outstanding growth, like TransMedics predicted to grow at 83%. SMCI predicted to grow at 64%. This is a new stock, SMCI, by the way, to the channel. Tidewater is also Tidewater is also a new stock in this channel that I will cover briefly. Now, let me talk about gross margin. As you can see, aside from this is a payments company, so this is rather normal for Shift 4, and SMCI, which is a hardware business. Aside from those, you can see that the gross margin is excellent with, HIMS, obviously one of my favorite stocks to cover on this channel at more than 80%. StoneCo, highly profitable. Oddity, which sells makeup, highly profitable company. TransMedics, MELI. I'm very happy to see these gross margins on average above 50%. The EBITDA margin, like I said, all I care about is that they don't go bankrupt. As you can see, nobody's going bankrupt anytime soon when you look at these numbers. And so I like that. And then we can look at the valuation metrics. Some stocks will look cheaper than others. And of course, my favorite stocks in the form of, say, HIMS or StoneCo, they are, of course, the cheapest here. Forward gross profits, that's the same thing. These metrics are very cheap. Compare this to any mainstream stock that you can find, and you'll find that it's pretty cheap. And EV over EBITDA, same. Whenever you have a decent EBITDA, you get a cheap stock. Whenever the EBITDA is not really meaningful because it's just out there for a company to not go bankrupt, you have a higher ratio, but not as relevant in my view. What is very relevant, and what kind of, this channel is kind of repeating in video over and over, is the enterprise value over gross profit over revenue growth. How much am I paying for that growth? And all of these metrics came out great for all of these stocks. I usually consider a stock to be really good if it's under 25, right? Under a 0.25, so the first quartile is typically what I consider very good. So you can go ahead, HIMS, StoneCo, Oddity, Tidewater, SMCI, SuperMicro, right? All of these fit even my stringent requirement for stocks. And then I've put all of these because, when you're 28, 29, or 32, you're also doing pretty good. You're in the top tier, right? The first tier. And so that's excellent. And on the rule of 40, this is where all of these stocks shine because they all exceed the rule of 40, and most of them exceed it with a wide margin. Pay attention to TransMedics with a 94 on the rule of 40, which is kind of unheard of. So these companies, in my view, are absolutely outstanding, and I own most of them. The only two companies that I don't own are Tidewater and SMCI, but I am looking at adding these two positions. I don't own them for now, but they came out very good in my spreadsheet. And so let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about each stock now. So the first stock is HIMSS. Yes, I've wanted to cover HIMSS. Unfortunately, I didn't have an office. I'm selling my house. It's a mess. I haven't had a chance to cover any of these stocks. I love everything that I saw about HIMSS. I love how they use the compounding method of pharmacy in order to be able to sell GLP-1s through the compounding exception. Important to note, there is one of the GLP-1s that is off patent, so even if that exception stops for some reason 2 to 3 years from now, they will still be able to sell weight loss products in the form of the off-label, off-patent one. I can't remember the name, but it's one of the older drugs. Don't forget metformin is obviously off-patent, and that is part of your prescription for weight loss, right? Secondary use. And don't forget that when I bought this stock, GLP-1s were not even on the radar, right? Well, GLP-1s, if you've owned this stock for a while, like I have, GLP-1s are kind of like a bonus of the past 9 months, and the market has just awoken to the opportunity of GLP-1s, which is why kind of the stock got trading to $24-25. But in my view, that's not my thesis for owning the business. This HIMSS to me is not a weight loss prescription drug company. HIMSS to me is just a disruptor of pharmacies and a disruptor of low stakes doctors' visits. The meat where most health systems, where most medical offices make a lot of money. All of that meat, all of those easy visits, HIMSS can cater for free, provided that someone buys a prescription outside of a regular insurance through HIMSS. And of course, that is very tempting not only to the people, and I think it's close to 50 million people in the US who don't have any health insurance. Well, that's very tempting to them. And that right there is a 10x of the potential market share for HIMSS if you just look at that. But if you look into people who have high copays, or people who choose to have a high deductible health plan because they want to do a stealth savings account, right? The HSA, in the professional world, in my field, I see a lot of people who are perfectly healthy. They decide to go for a high deductible plan because they want to do the HSA, right? The triple tax benefit of a HSA. Well, guess what? If you do that and you have a health need, then HIMSS all of a sudden becomes very valuable. This stock, in my view, is still the cheapest that I can find, and it falls squarely very cheaply in my spreadsheet at an EV over GP over RG of under a 7. And this shows that the price movement has really not changed the valuation. Like, for that valuation to just be considered cheap and not extremely cheap, this stock has to do like a 4x or a 5x, and then I'll say it's just cheap and it's not extremely cheap, and it will fall off in the later ranking of my sector. So I don't understand why this stock is so cheap. Some of it probably has to do still with some of the SPAC stigma. But over the long run, to quote Warren Buffett, over the long run, the stock is a weighing machine, and this stock is winning. This stock keeps winning. I'm very happy to own it. Another stock, which not a lot of people own, which I may be the only one who likes this stock, I don't know, but I really like StoneCo, STNE, the Square of Brazil. I use most fintechs in the US. I don't get this cheap valuation. I don't get these high numbers. I don't get this stunning EBITDA margin. I may get slightly higher revenue growth, but quite frankly, 15% revenue growth is competitive with a lot of US fintechs. And this stock keeps being highly, highly undervalued. And I guess that's the Brazilian discount. I am not sure the size of a Brazilian stock discount is that warranted, say, compared to the Chinese stock discount. We can argue Chinese stocks need to trade at a big discount. But Brazil, it's a huge country with 250 million people, with high growth rates, with high levels of development that's developing and growing. And, I don't have any exposure. I don't have much exposure to Latin America, only StoneCo and MercadoLibre. And I love the stock. I think it's a great stock. It used to be a darling of Wall Street in the zero interest rate environment, and maybe it's going to become a darling again. But if it doesn't, that's okay. And the stock has just been trading within a range. But at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do with piled cash, and they keep piling cash and piling cash and piling cash. And at some point, it will pay off. I'm a long-term investor, right? My preferred holding period is 10 years in general, 10 to 15 years, because that's how long it takes for a company, for an innovation, for an idea to be adopted by the market. And so I'm perfectly fine to own this stock. I've owned it for a few years now, and if it remains cheap, I'll keep adding. A stock that I've recently added, which I find particularly interesting, is Oddity Tech. So Oddity, it could be considered a direct-to-consumer stock. It could also be considered an AI stock. So what does Oddity do? They are trying to disrupt makeup, and they're starting with something with a key makeup product, which is foundation. And so it's their main brand is Makiage. It's very popular on social media, very popular for women, and it's got a very high recurring rate of purchase. So just like Hims, you get an ED drug. Well, I'm sorry, but you're not gonna stop taking your ED drug or your weight loss drug if it's been working. Well, the same is kind of true for Oddity to a lesser extent, but still somewhat true, which is once a woman has found a foundation that matches her skin perfectly, she's going to keep buying that foundation. And this is where this company has kind of taken the internet by storm, because they use their AI to scan someone's face and ask questions, and then they come up with the exact personalized skin tone to go in the makeup, and they sell the makeup, and that's why you have very high recurring sales. And they're trying to do this with skincare, and they have 2 more products in the launch, and it's a highly profitable company, 22%. This company, even if you like PEs, if you're into PEs, you'll find that this company is pretty cheap, still growing at 33%, gross margin is outstanding at 72%. It's cheap, the third cheapest out of 80 plus stocks in the spreadsheet. It's the third cheapest. The rule of 40 is there at a 55, absolutely outstanding rule of 40. So this stock has everything going on. I think one of the reasons why it's cheap may have to do with the fact that it's located in Israel. You've had a lot of stocks located in Israel that have been trading at a discount, so that may be the reason. But I really don't see it. To me, the stock should trade higher. Now, talking about Tidewater. So Tidewater is a company that I might do a fully dedicated video on, because it's in a field that you wouldn't consider me looking at, right? It's servicing of oil rigs, servicing of offshore oil installations. But there's actually a very debasement-based reason, a very macro/debasement reason as to why I would be interested in a company with Tidewater. It was simply companies haven't been building ships, and the ships to service these stations are very hard to come by, and these ships, these naval ships, are becoming very valuable, and this company is able to charge a premium to service these rigs and these oil rigs and oil station. And there's also, and this is fitting in the AI narrative, there's also a point to be made, which I wouldn't have made this point 3 years ago, but there's a point to be made that actually we need as much energy as we can for AI. And so these offshore oil drilling stations are not going away anytime soon if we are going to need that much energy in order to power AI, right? And the predictions are something like 3x the energy we need by 2030. I mean, there's no way. I mean, renewables are going to catch on really fast, in my view, but there's no way we can do a 3x in this period of time, or at least it will be very tough. And who knows whether the predictions of AI electricity needs are true. They might be much higher. They might be much higher than that. So I think this company is sort of in a secular trend. It's got the advantage that it is not subject to the price of oil as directly. It is indirect. It is a picks and shovels company to the oil industry. And there is this debasement aspect to it where the ships are actually gaining value because they haven't been building many of them since 2020 and even prior to that. And so that's why when you look at the numbers, you see the numbers are really good, predicted to grow sales at 37%. The stock is cheap, trading at only 6 times future gross profit. EBITDA trading at only 12 times EBITDA. How much am I paying for that growth? Not much. At a 0.24, I'm not paying much. And the rule of 40 is excellent at a 70, right? It's funny, you can compute. I mean, it's funny that I would decide to compute a rule of 40 on a ship company, but I did. And this looks as appealing as any software company to me. So I might do a full video on it. And if I keep liking it after doing a qualitative analysis, I might add to this company. Let me move on to SMCI, SuperMicro. So SuperMicro is an enabler of Nvidia, right? Whenever you build a data center, you need these racks, you need these motherboards, you need a whole bunch of equipment to build those data centers, and SuperMicro is closely linked to Nvidia in building those data centers and supplying a lot of the products needed for those data centers, and that's why they're doing well. And if you want to know anything about SMCI, if you go on their website, they'll redirect you to a keynote, an hour keynote of the CEO of SMCI with the CEO of Nvidia, where they discuss the role that they play. And we had kind of a counter indicator today on SMCI, which is Hindenburg Research. Just said that SMCI was a short candidate. And so if you it's kind of a Jim Cramer. If you do a reverse analysis, I remember when they attacked Square, well, it became very tempting to buy Square. Well, I'm thinking if a short seller is attacking SMCI, maybe, I don't know, maybe just saying it's a counter indicator. The stock is off from all-time highs by quite a bit, almost 60% if you're into trading. But I'm not. To me, I would look at this into the long run. And, this AI revolution is real. And this is also a way to invest in the picks and shovels of the AI revolution. I'm leaning towards this stock more than Nvidia. And I need investments in AI. I'm sad that I don't have much in the way of AI investments right now besides Tesla. So moving on to another company, which I didn't own SMCI, I didn't own Tidewater, I don't own these two. Celsius I own, and Celsius I've been adding to Celsius in the 40s. It's cheap. It's very cheap. And, yeah, sure, there's a recession and people may be buying less Celsius during a recession. But, I'm not so sure. I drink Celsius, I don't want to say daily, but I drink it a lot. And, with how much caffeine this thing got, I mean, it's got a lot of caffeine. Don't forget that caffeine keeps you coming back, right? I mean, the soda empire or the Starbucks empire was built on caffeine, and caffeine keeps you coming back. And Celsius has 200 milligrams of caffeine. Well, I don't know in other countries, but I know in the US, I know in Canada it's less. The regulator in Canada said you can't put as much caffeine. But I know in the US it's 200 milligrams of caffeine. And so that means that when I go to the gas station, unfortunately, I still have to go to the gas station, don't have an EV yet. When I go to the store, I still see teenagers, you decide whether that's a good thing or not, but I still see a lot of teenagers, a lot of families, women, men, young, old. I see them going after Celsius. They have this inclusive marketing that you don't find in, say, Monster, or that you don't find in, say, Red Bull. And they may have an offer even more compelling than coffee. As much as I love coffee, they may have an offer even more compelling than coffee, and they're coming to Europe. They just entered the UK. They're coming to France soon. I was in France over the summer. A lot of people are very excited about Celsius coming. They've heard of it. And so this thing has international growth in store. And I don't think the growth is done in the US for Celsius. I still see the pallets at Costco. I still see the pallets at Walmart. And so the product is flying off the shelves still. Sure, we may have a recession. We'll see if this will be abated by the fact that it's more of an addictive product that people can't do without. Moving on to 4. So Shift 4, and we have the CEO of Shift 4, who's the commander of the next SpaceX rocket. So the CEO of Shift 4, Isaac, man, is kind of an overachiever, very interesting guy, if you ask me. Overachiever, he refused to sell the company. Because it wasn't what he thought it was worth. You know, how many people would turn down billions and billions in cash just because they don't think it's worth the company? Well, that CEO did that, and I think that company is still undervalued right now, and my metrics tell me it's undervalued. Shift 4, in their approach to the payment, they're a payment processor. If you don't know anything about this company, they have payment terminals and they set up their payment terminals, but they've had a top-down approach to growth. You know, like when Square has had a bottom-up approach where you start with a small business and then you sell to a medium-sized business, etc. Shift 4 has had the opposite approach. They want to process payments for big hotel chains, big stadiums, big organizations, and then they're moving down the value chain, and they're moving down the size of these companies. And they've been very successful at gaining a lot of large deals. That's why revenue growth is still outstanding at a 32% revenue growth. EBITDA margin is there at 14%. This is a company that achieves this rule of 40 at a 46, albeit the lowest in there, but it's still at a rule of 40. It's got everything I like. And so I'll keep adding to Shift 4. I am building this position slowly. And for example, I like a Shift 4 much more than I like, say, a PayPal or even a Square, because of these valuation metrics and because of how well they are placed in this organism. And it's a founder-led company, right, which helps. Moving on to another founder-led company, which is MercadoLibre. MercadoLibre is the Amazon of Latin America without the cloud. Amazon without the cloud. They've figured out a recipe to work there where Amazon has failed. Amazon has not been able to do as well in Latin America. MercadoLibre is popular in Brazil, is popular in Mexico. They also have a bit of a fintech, unlike Amazon, right? Amazon doesn't have a fintech. MercadoLibre have a bit of a fintech where they finance a lot of micro transactions, right? Not to be confused with medium-sized businesses. MercadoLibre helps with a lot of micro businesses and enhance micro transactions. They have a shipping system. They have a popular website. They are very in tune with Latino culture, Mexican, Brazilian culture. They're performing in Argentina, and Argentina may be one of the countries that could benefit MercadoLibre as they are going through their own economic and political changes. And I like this stock very much, and so it's become a big position for me. I remember buying it in the 700s or the 800s, and now the stock is much higher than that, right? It's in close to the 2000, about 2000, so it's doing really, really well, and it's exceeding all of my metrics. So I can't follow them, even though it's a 0.3 true. It's still in the top tier cheapest stock that I follow and that I analyze. And lastly, a stock which, you know, really, if you really think about it, can we justify paying a 0.32 for this company, given the outstanding numbers that we get on this one? I mean, 83% revenue growth. That's the biggest revenue growth, perhaps, out of all of the stocks that I follow. Definitely out of all of the stocks that I selected here. You know, finding 83% revenue growth with EBITDA positive numbers, that's pretty tough. And finding that also cheap, because, you know, you could say, oh, Nvidia grows very fast like that. Yeah, Nvidia, I could argue it's going to grow 150% next year or something. Yeah, sure. But Nvidia on the EV over GP over RG is like a 4. That's like a 4. So this one is a 0.32, so 11 or 12 times cheaper than an Nvidia. And arguably, this company as much as it makes me uneasy what they do, this company as a moat. This company as a moat, they have an FDA approved organ care system. So whenever, unfortunately, and that's the unfortunate part, whenever somebody has a car accident and they're an organ donor, well, back in the day, these organs, the surgeon at the hospital would put the organ in dry ice, and then it would have to be shipped somewhere to a candidate. And oftentimes it would fail. Oftentimes it would fail. A much greater number of organs were just wasted because we didn't have this organ care system. So now with TMDX, with TransMedics, the surgeon can put the organ into the machine, and the machine will keep the organ alive until transplant day. And TransMedics is a hybrid between not only this organ care system, and they have 3 main organs that they cater for transplant, right? But they also bought a flight school which they shut down and turned it into an airline. And so they have a bunch of small planes where they can fly the organs from destination to destination to destination, and they don't have to have charter jets to move the organs through dry ice. And the way this used to do before TransMedics, and this is still done by a large share of the industry, is you have to charter jets, charter private jets to move these organ transplants on dry ice. And as the CEO famously says, on some days, it's game day or there's a big event somewhere, when all of the wealthy people need a private jet, there's essentially 1 day out of 3 where you can't get a private jet because, I don't know, it's the Super Bowl or it's the World Series and all of the private jets are rented, which meant that many organs would go to waste because you couldn't find a jet to transplant the organ between a donor and somebody actually compatible. And this has a lot to do with compatibility. Not everybody is compatible. If there's an unfortunate accident in your town, you're going to have a very hard time finding somebody who may be compatible in your town. Oftentimes, the organ has to travel to a recipient that is a match. And so that's what this company enables to do. And they can grow much more. They have a long-term goal of 10,000 transplants. I think they're at about 2,000 transplants right now. So TransMedics is a large position for me. I'm adding to this position, although I gotta say it's tough because it did a 3 or 4x compared to when I started buying, so it's tough. But I am adding to the position. It's a founder-led company, and they are doing very well at what they do, and it's the highest rule of 40. Double, just that, double. Think about that, double the rule of 40. So these are the stocks that I find the most compelling. The 9 stocks that I find the most compelling right now, as far as undervaluation to growth goes. Hypergrowth, but also undervalued 1 year out, right? And these stocks are different from, say, when I talk about a Tesla, when I talk about an Enphase, where I describe a 10-year story. This is not a 10-year story. These companies are not 10-year stories. These companies are next 12 months stories. And this is why I like them very much, and that's my more managed, more active part of my portfolio. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I am back. There will be more videos coming, although I'm not going to go full speed right away, but there will be more videos coming. This is not investment advice. This is just entertainment. Please like, please subscribe. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day. Happy to be back.